Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I can't really claim to be an expert in the way that Roger is. I've been involved with this site for a very long time, partly because I'm on the committee and council of the Cam Valley Forum, and we were very concerned about the risks of pollution to the river, and also because I know the Elliots, particularly Courtney Elliott, for a very long time, and I gave them this advice, but I have never had any commercial interest or financial interest in this site. Now, I basically am both a botanist and a geologist, and there were two problems at this site. One, why was the water table higher on the factory site than in the river? And I managed to discover the answer to that, and that is that there's an Ice Age river branch of the River Cam, which formerly came through where Will Garfit's gravel pits, and that's why the gravel there, and joined the river. So there is still in those gravels water coming down onto the site. And that aids the spread of contamination out from the site. But as a botanist, walking round the area, I couldn't but be very aware that not only in part of the Elliots' land, but around the perimeter of the site, as you walk down the road here, as you walk round and back through by the river, that you could see, and particularly recently, clear signs of damage to plants which can only relate to herbicides. Now, these, I don't know whether you can read that well, but this is the list of contaminants of concern, and you can see that there are agrochemicals were manufactured here. So you've got all the sort of precursors that were being used in that manufacture, and then when the stuff has got let loose into the soil through some mishaps or other, then of course it starts breaking down some of it into separate compounds. So there's an absolutely horrendous cocktail here which you can't simply deal with by looking at the list of things that were here. Now, there are clear sites of plant damage all around the factory site on every side of it. But as we have seen, there seem to be just certain patches which have been affected. It's very much the same with the way that people have felt about the odours and the things that you can find. It's perfectly all right sometimes, and then there'll just come a blast of it. And it seems as if the plants have also suffered that there are certain areas at certain times when presumably these volatiles have been laden with something that has herbicide effects on plants, then where that falls, those plants are affected, and different plants are affected in different ways. On the other hand, we've had it's quite severe drought recently, and I haven't always been able to take photographs when I wanted. And the other thing is that although we're concerned here particularly about materials that have been blowing around, remember that there is groundwater floating around under the soil, and this has undoubtedly escaped from the factory site. Now, I'm just going to give you some examples of this. I owe this particular photograph to Mr. DeHath, who's probably here, and I'd like to thank him personally. And this is very characteristic of herbicide damage. You see how the edges of the leaves curl up. Those of you who've walked down past the church to the main road, looking at the hedge garlic over the past few weeks, will have noted that many of the hedge garlic plants show exactly this, and yet others perfectly green, flat leaves, and so on. Then another feature, these are nettles. They don't look like nettles because the leaves are just curled straight up. And you can see this in various areas around the site. Brambles with cut leaves, but this time the leaves tend to go down like that, so that they're inverted. And sometimes you can see that the plants are turning yellow and the leaves are showing very clear signs of distress. And if you had, for example, sprayed nettles with something like Roundup, that's the kind of feature, brambles, that's the kind of feature that you might have got. Then you've got the woody plant showing distorted growth. This is slow buckthorn just at the edge of the site as you go down here. If you go into Peter Elliott's field, you find the same. At first I was worried, I thought, can there be spray drift? And then but he hasn't sprayed anything, I think, since March, or since before the remediation started. But then you go on the outside of the hedge, and you see exactly the same thing, and you see it in other sites as well. Sorry, that. Walking down, there are poking through the fence bits of the garden plant, garden shrub, the Duke of Argyll's tea tree, and look what's happened to the leaves there. Now they were fairly close to where that spray stuff was coming and at one time soaking the footpath. And there is some suspicion that some of the actual odorizers or deodorizers, whichever you care to call, may also have a herbicide. But I mean that's a horrific condition for a plant. You can walk down and look at that if you walk down and look at the side. Oh, you can see that. This is Norway maple. All the leaves are distorted. That's on the roadside side of the site. And if you walk particularly along the footpath down towards the mill, once you get into the woods, you can see that there's an awful lot of dust there on the vegetation. And we've had enormous amount of rainfall recently, and before we had this drought. But during that time, that dust has not shifted. And in many cases, you can see the plants on which the dust has fallen aren't very happy. So I'm not satisfied with the idea that all this dust that is blowing around is harmless.